What you need to remember when you look at the history of science is that the scientific process is not something that came naturally to the human race. It took us thousands of years to develop the processes that we use today. And I want you to appreciate all of the changes that slowly had to occur to get us to where we are now. So I like to look at several phases. The first is superstition. Superstition just means that you try to explain the world using magic or mythology. So magic or myths. So if you want it to rain, you do a rain dance, or you pray to the gods, or you sacrifice cats. You don't really understand how the world works, and so you blame it all on these supernatural forces that you have very little control of. Early humans spent a long time in the superstition phase because they were so busy just trying to survive that they didn't really have time to learn what was really going on in the world around them. Now, eventually we move on to philosophy. Philosophy uses logic and reasoning. So I'm going to say logic and reason. Rather than blaming things on magical gods, they tried to use their minds to think about the world and what might be happening. And so they came up with some very complicated explanations of why the world behaved the way it did. Now, what makes philosophy different from science, we're going to see in a moment, is that philosophers didn't really do a lot of experiments to test their theories. They just used their minds to think about it, and that really was a weakness with philosophy. The scientific revolution is when we finally started doing experiments to test our theories. So instead of just trying to think about how the world behaved, we actually went out and designed labs and experiments to test our ideas and see if we were right. And this allowed humans to learn that many of our earlier theories were actually incorrect. They were wrong, and then over time we developed better theories that were more accurate. Now, with the scientific revolution came a big leap forward in math. Humans have been doing math for a long time, but when we combined it with science, it allowed us to develop a lot of equations that could be used to predict future behavior, meaning that if you knew the equation, you could predict what an object was going to do before it happened. And this is really powerful. These math equations that we developed are still used by NASA to send astronauts into space, even though the equations were written back in the 1600s, long before we had ever dreamed of space exploration. The modern phase of science is basically what's happening now, and I'm just going to write the phrase, dig deeper. A lot of people think that science is done. We've already discovered everything we need to know, but this isn't true. There's a lot of theories that we have that we still don't completely understand. And so scientists are digging deeper and deeper, trying to figure out what is the root cause, what actually makes gravity happen. Things like that. Now, each of these phases, I'm going to give you a name that's associated with the phase and also the country they lived in, because it's interesting to see that the history of science really mirrors the history of humans in general. I'm going to focus on the Western world, meaning Europe. There was a lot going on in India and Asia, and I don't want to discount the fact that they were doing amazing things as well. But because we live in a Western culture, I'm going to focus on the Western scientists. So I'll start with philosophy. The name you want to remember is Aristotle, and he lived in Greece. Aristotle developed many theories, and those theories were used for a long time because people thought that he was accurate and that his theories were correct. It wasn't until years later when new scientists like Galileo, who lived in Italy, came along, and he started to actually do experiments to test Aristotle's theories, and he discovered that no, Aristotle was not always right. And so Galileo developed new theories that contradicted the earlier philosophers, and this actually got Galileo in a lot of trouble. Now, the big name for math is Sir Isaac Newton, and he lived in England. He's famous for developing calculus and just for being a really good mathematician in general. It is Newton's equations that we're going to spend a lot of time on this year, and it's also Newton's equations that are used to launch satellites into orbit, and they're very successful at predicting the behavior of those satellites, which is cool when you realize how long ago Newton was alive. The big modern name is Einstein. He's famous for looking at a lot of very basic theories that we had and just digging deeper to uncover new layers of meaning and possibility. He helped spark what's called the quantum revolution, and he's famous for something called the theory of relativity. A lot of really interesting things. Now, I want to and Einstein was born in Austria, but he immigrated to the United States before World War II, and then he spent the rest of his life here. At the bottom of this list, I'm going to add the word future because it's so important to remember that science isn't done. There are so many more things to discover and things to learn, and this process is going to continue on for years to come as humans just learn and understand more and more about the universe around us.